This is sport physical activity in Australian society, key idea 2, and we'll have a looking at the right hand side here. The question: investigate how physical activity and sport have influenced the lives of Indigenous Australians. Hopefully you've already listened to the recording of the summary of the left hand side here of the meaning of physical activity and sport to Indigenous Australians. So over the next few slides I'm going to give you a scaffold of how I would go about answering this question. Now, before getting started on that scaffold, we need to have a look at this term, what investigate requires you to do, and it wants you to look into the topic and then make some conclusions. Now, what I've been doing with these recordings is giving you a way you could construct your first paragraph. I'm not going to read it here, but once again what I'm doing is introducing the syllabus dash points that I'm going to talk about, and I've put them in bold and underlined them there, and I've also introduced the idea of what my conclusion is going to be on this topic. And here is that it has been important for Indigenous Australians to use sport to promote their identity. So just hit pause here and just read how I've set up that first paragraph, which will then help me construct the rest of my answer. So we're up to the second paragraph now, and I'm going to introduce this idea of writing about this dash point here, traditional activities and sport. And we're going to write about a couple of examples of Aboriginal games, and one of the examples is this game called Ketan, which is a keep away game. You could write about how it was played long before colonisation, but it has given Indigenous Australians a base for being extremely skillful, and games that were played that has also given the ability to have a good skill base, which then becomes useful in games that they play today, such as AFL and rugby league. So in the previous paragraph you talked about how the traditional games gave them the base to be successful in games like AFL, and in this paragraph you can go on to talk about outstanding Indigenous sportsmen. You could talk about how they're overrepresented for the population in the game of AFL, and you could also talk about how sport is just now part of Indigenous life, as it's an opportunity to express themselves and express their identity. Paragraph 3, we're going to tackle the next dash point, links between community and identity, and use this paragraph to be able to promote how Indigenous people use sport to promote their issues and their identity. The point that would be obvious to talk about is the problem of racism and how it's happened in the past, but today Indigenous athletes such as Adam Goodes are being really strong advocates in talking about the problem of racism that still exists on the sporting field, but more importantly exists in wider society. And I think Adam Goodes has been very influential in highlighting that and making that a real issue to be talked about in this nation. You could also go on to talk about how sport through the AFL and NRL, how they use the Indigenous rounds to promote not only the good Indigenous skillful athletes to play their game, but more importantly they use those rounds, the Indigenous rounds, to promote the problems that Indigenous people experience outside of sport, particularly in the areas of education and in health. And finally, your conclusion, I would be making it a pretty strong statement that sport has been very influential in promoting a sense of Indigenous identity and also promoting the problems Indigenous people suffer in this country. You could finish by using the excellent role model that Cathy Freeman was when she won gold at the 2000 Sydney Olympics. That idea of carrying the two flags together. She wasn't making a statement that she was just Indigenous or she was just Australian, that she was in fact both, that she's a proud Indigenous Australian, and her performance really shone light on of how successful Indigenous people have been in this country.